mainly four factors of production: land, labor, capital, and organization. Those are considered factors of production. Knowledge was never considered a factor of production. But it was for the first time, knowledge was defined, or rather identified, a component of production by a famous economist called Romer, and it was widely picked up by an American economist, sociologist, Matcha. And what the Matcha talked about, that is, there is contribution of knowledge in the development of each and every component of the economy, maybe agricultural, maybe industrial, and maybe post-industrial. So when you are talking about the knowledge society, the first component taking into consideration, knowledge is a factor of production, number one. And number two, it distinguishes from the other societies by this fact: knowledge society is founded on the mass production, mass dissemination, mass use, mass generation, and mass exploitation of knowledge for the generation of society. We are having some men of wisdom in our society, also Bengal. We are having a lot of যাদেরকে আমরা বলি গুণী ব্যক্তি, জ্ঞানী ব্যক্তি, গুণী ব্যক্তি, ওরা ওয়েদারের সম্পর্কে বলে দেবে. They will speak about the weather. They will talk about the possibility of rain taking place or not, crop will be harvested, good or bad, they will talk about. But those are the knowledge, those are the wisdom. But those wisdoms are neither systematized, nor commoditized, nor used for mass scale production and dissemination, and not used for the generation of wealth and employment. So what is important? I'm talking about, please underline this fact. Number one, we're talking about mass production of knowledge, mass dissemination of knowledge, mass exploitation of the knowledge, not for the knowledge sake, for the generation of wealth and employment in the society. What the agricultural production does, what the industrial production does, it generates wealth and employment. Similarly, knowledge is used for the production of wealth and employment. Now, when we are talking about the knowledge, it is also always interchangeably used the term information. When you talk about the information, we also use the term data. When you talk about the data, we also use the term ideas. So keep in mind, when we talk about the idea is certain hunch, some idea we are having. When those hunch and those ideas are systematized in a particular order, it becomes certain data. When data are processed, it becomes information. When information is applied, it becomes knowledge. Now at this point, there is no agreement between the social scientists. When the knowledge applied becomes information, or information applied, it becomes knowledge. But for the uses of the knowledge society, I like to put all these ideas, information, knowledge, data in one box, which can be used for large-scale uses, exploitation, for the generation of wealth and employment. And this is one of the key components of the factors of production. So when we talk about the emergence of knowledge society, we talk about the emergence of the knowledge worker. The emergence of the agricultural society from pre-agricultural society, widely marked by the emergence of agricultural worker. The industrial society, widely marked by the emergence of the industrial worker. The knowledge society is widely marked by the emergence of the knowledge workers. But the knowledge workers are not fixed. Knowledge workers are having four important categories. One are those who produce the knowledge, they are the author of the knowledge. Another category, those who disseminate the knowledge, they are having the capacity for the dissemination. Third category, those who transport the knowledge, they transport it. Fourth category, those who have the capacity to exploit the knowledge, to hybridize, and also bring new kind of interface with other kind of knowledge and information. So we are having varieties kind of workers, as a knowledge worker, as a producer, as a disseminator, as a transporter, as an exploiter of the knowledge. They are contributing to the growth of knowledge economy. Now, when we talk about the knowledge society, it's having certain condition. What are the condition? That is two varieties of the knowledge. One is a tacit knowledge, another is explicit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is that those were available in human mind, but it has not come to the forefront. And explicit knowledge, those who have been exploited, it has come to the forefront. It is just like an iceberg in the deep sea. That is, those who are above the sea, we can see there is an ice above the sea. We call it is the explicit knowledge. Those just below the sea, those were the implicit knowledge. The tacit knowledge. So what is important that it is from the cultivation of human mind the knowledge is created. The center of capital of the knowledge society is not industry. Center of capital of knowledge society is not agriculture. Center of capital of knowledge society, it is the human mind. It is the more you cultivate, the more you gain out of this. So that's why many of the scholars talked about the capacity of knowledge society is infinite, because human brain is infinite. So it is through the infinite development of human mind that a knowledge society can be developed to an extent. So another important component of knowledge society is that human being. Knowledge society never consider a human being as a liability, rather they consider as a human as a resource, because every human being is born with a mind. And it is the responsibility of the state and the society to cultivate that mind, to bring that mind as an explicit source of knowledge, rather than to give them the tacit source of knowledge. So the human being is one of the important components of the knowledge society. So when we talk about the co-constituent of knowledge society, it is quite important. That is, what is important? It is a kind of knowledge revolution that is widely taking place in terms of printing press, television, computer, internet, and mobile phone. So one of the important components of the knowledge society is information and communication technology. That is number one. Number two is the formal education, skill and training. That is quite important. And third important component is neoliberal economic globalization. That is, the trade should take place as per the GATT and WTO, what we talked about. That is the borderless trading of items, the data and information, everything. It will be traded across the globe without any border. So what is important? Along with ICT, education, training, we need another expansion. That is the neoliberal economic globalization. That is quite important. And another important we talk about in terms of wide expansion of the service sector of the economy. That is quite important. If we look into the countries, those who have described themselves widely founded on the knowledge economy, mostly the Western Europe and North America, you will find a closer relationship between higher education and a higher degree of service is linked to the higher rate of GDP, the gross domestic product in this country. What is important? When there is more and more people educated, more and more people involved in service sector, more people involved in service sector, the knowledge economy, more people is more contribution to the gross domestic product. Now, how this hypothesis is correct, I'll come a little later. I'll talk about that. So what happened in the knowledge society? A knowledge society, it shifts the site of action, what we call site of action from field and factory to human mind. That is, in agricultural field, the site of action was the agricultural field. In industrial society, the site of action was the industry, the huge kind of mechanical power. That is what we call, it is from mud to manual and manual to mind. So it is the site of production in human society, in knowledge society, is the human mind. So what we find, along with this emergence of the knowledge society, there has been phenomenal development, phenomenal change in the structural arrangement of the society, also in the whole process of construction of the new identities. Okay, so at this stage, let me take you to a small kind of differentiation of these three kind of society we have seen so far. That is the agricultural society, the industrial society, the knowledge society. Okay, so let me talk about this society a little bit. I'm not getting any feedback from you. Are you listening? Are you getting me clear? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
I'm audible? Okay. Am I making sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Should I be small? I know little slower than what I am?
No, sir, it's absolutely fine.
Okay, all right. Well, okay. Let me go at this stage to make a comparison between these three types of societies. Okay. So, what are the key resources of the agricultural society? Key resources of the agricultural society are the natural resources, that is the land and physical power. And key resources of the industrial society is the machine and the physical labor of the laborer. So physical labor is still there, but natural resource is added with the machine power. But in the knowledge society, the key resource is the mental capability and the intellectual capability. Am I clear at this stage?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Let's come to the second. What are the sources of power in this three society? The agricultural society, the sources of power is the land and animal. Industrial society is the steam engine. Knowledge society is the internet. Okay? And the major product of these three societies, the agricultural society is the food and the other basic services. That is the service sector. Social identities in the agricultural society is mostly communitarian, global. In the agricultural society, most of the identities are fixed. So also industrial society, along with the fixed identity, there is addition to secular identities like the secular, the class character and the professional groups. And if we look into the knowledge society, we are having multiple identities, both the communitarian, secular, and also non-secular identities. The forms of mobility, if we look into all these three societies, agricultural society is slow space of mobility, widely conditioned by primordial arrangement. Industrial society is a fast pace of mobility, both are vertical. In the knowledge society, the space of mobility is very fast. It is both vertical and horizontal. When you talk about the vertical mobility, it may be both upward and also downward. I understand you are aware of this difference between the vertical and horizontal mobility. So I'll not elaborate this part, and that I hope you understand that. Now, when we talk about this, the ideal vision of the knowledge society, it is quite important that when the knowledge society has emerged, is looked into that it is the ideal vision, what is the ultimate formation of the society, human society. This is widely talked about. How it is talked about, that is, industrial society was totally unequal society. Lot of class and economic differences, political imbalances, and also environmental hazards it encountered industrial society. So it is talked about, that is, in the knowledge society there will be no class, there will be no class difference, because everybody will be mentally capable to satisfy his own economic, social, and political need. There will be no political imbalances, because everybody will be enlightened, democratic, and also holding their own power. Ideal society, in the human civilization. It is also talked about this society will bring a progressive and high quality human being with a moral standard, and because everybody will be enlightened, informed, and everybody will be knowledgeable. And it will repress the high risk. What we find that society, industrial society is a high risk in terms of job description, in terms of environmental surroundings. So this society will be a less risk society because the hazards of the industrial society will not be carried out. So what usually talked about, that is, here power will be diffused because each human being will be the center of power, and it will be less hierarchical the way it is talked about. Now let us talk about the economic transition of India, the way the economic transition has taken place since independence. Do you need a break? It is already 1 hour. Should we give you a break for 10 minutes? Or should I continue?
Continue, sir. No issue.
All right. Because I'm not getting response from the student. So,
No, it's okay, sir.
Continue,
You
sir.
can continue.
yes. Okay, let us talk about that is the whole process of transition of the Indian economy. As you understand, that is India, we inherited a fragmented society after independence in 1947. So, the government of India after independence introduced several of the policies for agrarian reforms and rapid industry that will generate, that will reduce all kinds of social inequality, issues of unemployment in the society. It also saw in 1970s onward a different kind of a planning perspective, because in 1950s we saw it is talked about development with growth, what it talked about, and 1970s, in the ache of persisting unemployment, economic inequality, there was the proliferation of the Naxalite movement in 1969-71, and also simultaneously the varieties of inequalities was parts of the country. So our developmental perspective saw a new kind of a twist in 1970s. We started talking about development with justice, rather distributed justice in 1970s. In 1980s onward, we started talking about development with empowerment. 1990s, we started talking about development with inclusion. The varieties of developmental perspective are implemented in Indian society. But what happened, that is, a centralized planning was the key to Indian development policy. Also, socialist pattern of society, what they talked about, it continued till late 1980s. But Indian society, till 1980s, we saw it is widely talked about. It remained partly agriculturally developed, where green revolution took place only in the western UP, Haryana, Punjab, in some parts of Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra. And Indian economic growth became very slow, 0.2 decibel, 4.2 decibel kind of economic growth rate. Many economists like Ken Russ talked about the conservative rate of economic growth. It is talked about the Hindu rate of economic growth in India. This is widely talked about. And this widely characterized the poverty, unemployment, illiteracy, ill health of the Indian people. It is widely talked about. Simultaneously, India also saw a huge kind of a declining of land-man ratio. That is, in 1947, when we got independence, only 0.48 hectare per person land was there in India. Now it has declined in 211 to the extent of 0.08 hectare per person. What we find, land-man ratio quite declined in our country. And gradually, number of the people as a marginal worker, not getting more than 160 days of 180 days of work, their proportion also increased. We find the people, those who are the landless and semi-landless, they become 75% of the rural population. Huge quantum of the people was migrating from rural to the urban areas. And then there was a process of casualization of the labor force, cultivators becoming agricultural laborers, the tenants becoming agricultural laborers. How do you find this gradual decline of the Indian economic scenario warranted a new kind of economic initiative? It is quite important that till 1980s, when India's economic condition was quite declining, India started looking for a new kind of economic perspective. Because when India's economic condition was declining, in the West there was already knowledge revolution was taking place, ICT was coming very frequently, becoming very popular and widely penetrating across the societies in most of the developed societies. At this backdrop, the Planning Commission of India, widely talked about, that is, I'm quoting what the Planning Commission talked about. We miss the Industrial Revolution, but we should not miss the knowledge revolution, because here lies the destiny of India, a shining India. So it is widely talked about the Planning Commission shifting gear to the Indian economy. So what happened at that point of time? In late 1990s, a new kind of a developmental perspective came in. That is the structural adjustment program, which we popularly talk about SAP, that is SAP program. Neoliberal economic policy was introduced in India in 1990s. Keep in mind, I already talked to you, that is a neoliberal economic framework is widely warranted for the expansion of the knowledge economy. So neoliberal economic policy was introduced in India in 1990s. What happened? The importance of privatization and foreign direct investment in insurance, in health, in education, road transport, and in IT sector become phenomenal. And gradually we find that is more and more emphasis started giving on development of knowledge-based and the skill-based industries. If we look into now, till 2016, when we got independence, India was barely having 97 universities. Now today in our country we are having more than 1,312 universities and more than 49,000 colleges. And we also simultaneously find that the different varieties of the educational institution has come in with the emergence of internet and mobile facilities. Now in our country, 64% of the people having access over internet, 92% people having access over mobile. That is not only one regular universities. We are also having the blended learning, the MOOCs, the ODL, the open universities, the distance education directorate, varieties of the cities, educational institutions. Even in 1980s, only 4% of our people going to the higher education doorstep. Now we find GER in higher education to the extent of 29%. So huge kind of expansion of the educational industries and number of the educational institutions and the skill development institutions. Now we find a new kind of experiences is coming in terms of high concentration of the youth in the population. We find that 65% of Indian population belong to the age group of below 35 years. So here is a kind of concentration of the young population, and it is quite aspired that India should harvest the benefit of the young population, get the dividend out of it, rather than it should be a demographic disaster. So there is a new kind of momentum in the economy with the interpenetration of ICTs on the one hand, high education on the other, higher education on the other, and third, what we call neoliberal economic globalization. Now, what we find the Indian economic scenario is quite important. I wish this part you will listen to very carefully, because our participation in agriculture gradually has declined from 73% in 1971. Now it is 2020-21 is 48%. We find that work participation in agriculture declined. So what happened to the GDP? In 1971, 62% of the GDP was coming from agriculture. Now we find 16% of the GDP is coming from agriculture. So both in work participation and GDP from agriculture has declined. Now what we find, a kind of a moderate rate of development in the industrial sector. We find that it has increased from 13% of work participation to 27% work participation of the workforce. So industry has not been able to develop to that extent that it will accommodate the whole burden of the population growth in the country. And what is the GDP? It is contributing to the extent of 25% of the GDP in the country. But what is important? The service sector. What I told in the earlier few minutes back, that is, development of service sector is one of the key indicators of the development of knowledge economy. Service sector that was giving roughly around 27% of the GDP, now it gives to the extent of 63% of our GDP. And so far the labor force is concerned, it accommodates roughly around 31% of the labor. High amount of productivity of the labor force, number one, and a high amount of GDP India is extracting from the service sector. So altogether what we find, a momentum is generated for the development of the knowledge economy in Indian society. That's why we find the agricultural growth rate is only to the extent of 4%, industry around 6%, the service sector is growing to the extent of 9.4% per annum. So this is quite important that we are leading towards an economic dynamic that is widely generated by the momentum of the knowledge-based. Now, what we find a new kind of a momentum generated in the society. So as a sociologist, we should be interested to know what kind of new momentum is generated in the Indian society. So we find varieties of the new avenues of employment is generated, new occupational diversification is taking place, and also simultaneously a vast quantum of occupational mobility across the space. If you go to the rural area, there is agriculture, simultaneously there is computer hub. There is also knowledge-based avenues of employment growing across the country. So what we find is the vast movement of not only of physical goods like motor vehicle, tractors, etc. like this, there is vast movement of new messages, new image, new information, new ideas across the space with the WhatsApp, mobile phone, and varieties of the software taking place all over the country. So what we find, a high degree of mobility of the workers from one segment to that of another. People are migrating from agriculture to the other sector, from rural to the urban areas. Now we find in India, 46% of our workforce are the migratory workforce, and majority of them are migrating for getting employment in the urban areas. So what we find, that new kind of mobility and momentum is taking place. But what is important is that the knowledge society has also created a new kind of a hierarchy. What is that hierarchy? We find a kind of a core knowledge worker, those who are at the helm of the economic affairs of the society. Who are they? They are the doctors, the engineers, the software engineers, the bankers, the travel agents, varieties of the workers, those who are dealing with the data, information, and the knowledge industry. So what we find, they experience a higher degree of upward mobility and a higher degree of prestige and income in the society. And they are simultaneously, they are having obviously higher command, higher degree of accumulation of educational degree with them. Then linked to that core, there is support service providers like the security service providers, the labor service providers, the software service providers, varieties of the service industries. But at the helm, at the bottom of everything, we find vast category of the manual workers. They are working. They have been either horizontally mobile from the rural to the urban areas, or from urban areas from slum to the unorganized sector. So what we find, they are remaining mostly in the peripheral activities. So what we find, three categories of the workers have emerged in the knowledge society. Core knowledge workers, number one. Number two, linked to the core. Number three is the peripheral manual worker. Now, peripheral manual worker is quite important because knowledge society has not developed as it is only for the knowledge worker. We find that along with the emergence of knowledge society, there has been expansion of the railway track, expansion of the transport, expansion of the roadways, expansion of the shopping mall, expansion of the business center, data processing center, use kind of a multiplex. So for the development of those, the cities and the urban center need the labor forces. So we find huge kind of mobility of the workforce from the rural to the urban areas to provide the support services to the urban areas. So what we find, a new kind of hierarchy has also emerged that replaces the earlier kind of hierarchy, like the industrialist, the employer, one category, landowner, and the laborer, the other categories. So we find the knowledge worker, a support service provider, and peripheral knowledge manual worker. And none of these categories are fixed. There is a possibility of mobility from one category to the other, rather subject to the acquiring of knowledge and skill in their particular sector. So what we find, along with this categorization, there have been different layers of marginality in the society. That is inherited marginality, what we call, that is based on inherited denial, deprivation, and hierarchy in the society. So should there be any question, I'll elaborate this part. And then subject to that, we find the lower caste and the ethnic status, a kind of a huge kind of a correlationship. That is, lower the caste and the ethnic status, lower is the life chances for upward mobility and chances of integration with the knowledge society. Because lower caste and the ethnic group and women, because of remaining disadvantaged in getting educational opportunities, their scope and extent of integration of the knowledge society has been low. So what we find, that's why they have remained mostly structurally and functionally marginalized in the knowledge society. And what we find, there is a possibility of historically cumulative and socially relational marginality in the knowledge society. What is historically cumulative marginality? Lower the caste status, lower is the integration in the knowledge society. What is relational? If somebody socially is not educated, they are also not economically integrated. So both the cumulative and relational marginality is linked to the whole process of onward march of the knowledge society in the society. So what we find, this process continues in the content of our knowledge society. If we look into in terms of various social categories and their integration in the knowledge society, we have certain categories. That is, we find that general caste having a high level of integration in the knowledge society, with a higher access to post-secondary education, access to ICTs, access to knowledge, non-managerial job, and also in the managerial job, there is a high level of integration. OBCs are having moderate level of integration. Scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and women are having a low level of integration of the knowledge society. So what we find, the inequality that the Indian society is inherited, that is also reflected in the onward march of the knowledge society. Now, let us come to this. If this is the phenomenon, what kind of cultural value and conflicting condition is generated in Indian society? Because the knowledge society has brought in a new kind of socialization, new process of imparting education, new network, a new space, and space of development. New pattern of socialization. It is not only the family. Earlier, it is only the family that was socializing the children. Now, children are widely socialized by social media. The imparting education, the educational institution in the family. Now we find a lot of WhatsApp university product. And also we find the ICT-based and online education, new provider of education, new social network. That is not network based on earlier caste, kinship, and neighborhood. This is the WhatsApp group, the Facebook, the Instagram, so many other, the Twitter group. You find varieties of networks is developed. It has created a new kind of a space for people for social networking, and new kind of space in terms of a higher speed in the life. Within that, we find arrival of the Deshi Gypsies, or the digital natives, and those who want to live the society here and now, vis-a-vis another community of the elderly generation, those who want to live at future even at the cost of the present. So we find a two varieties of generation, that is the digital native who want to live at present, maybe even at the cost of future, but we find a kind of another generation who want to live at the future even at the cost of present. And we find a huge kind of divide, both in terms of generation, spatial divide in terms of rural, urban, gender, and also in terms of social categories, as I told a few minutes back. Now, but despite that, what we find that is knowledge society that is emerging in India, it is emerging in a pre-event society. What is the pre-event society? It has remained partially traditional society and also partially modern society. It is culturally thus shifting between a global society and a local society. It has remained part agricultural, part industrial, and part knowledge-based, because in Indian society, nothing is replaced. Everything is cumulatively inherited and simultaneously inherited in terms of tradition and modernity, globalization and localization, agriculture, industrial, and the part knowledge-based society. So what we find that is in India, many centuries are living together. That is, we are having the generation of 18th century mindset. We're also having the generation of 21st century mindset. And so many generations are living together. So we find a kind of contextualization and decontextualization in this society that is widely defining what we call the new parameters of social inclusion and exclusion in the society. Within that, we find certain trends taking place in this society. What are those trends? First trend is that higher the degree of expansion of education and ICT, higher the degree of penetration of the knowledge job, and higher is the quantum of social mobility. This is quite important. That is, if there is a higher degree of penetration of education and penetration of ICTs, there is every possibility that there will be a high penetration of knowledge job and a high quantum of social mobility in the society. Just second correlation is that higher the traditional social status, higher is the degree of concentration in the key and the core knowledge job. Because those who are having the traditionally higher social status, they have been able to acquire the social capital at a higher rate, so they have got high concentration in the knowledge job. It is not to say that others are not getting the opportunities, but there is an amount of concentration in terms of traditional social status and high-end occupational mobility in the knowledge society. Then higher the degree of segregation in the penetration of knowledge job, higher is the imbalance in social mobility. Segregation in the penetration in the knowledge job means there has been varieties of the knowledge job. If there is those segregation in terms of managerial, non-managerial, technical, non-technical, so there is imbalance in the social mobility. Because those who are having the professional and technical education, they are in a higher amount of mobility than those who are having the general kind of education in the society. Fourth kind of equation is that higher the degree of imbalance in social mobility, higher is the form and extent of marginalization in the society. If there is imbalance in social mobility, obviously there will be imbalance in the process of marginalization in the society. Now, imbalance penetration of knowledge-related job and social mobility and persistent marginality contributes to the construct of marginal identities. It is linked to the point which I elaborated at the very outset. Imbalanced penetration of the knowledge job, that is, varieties of the knowledge job at places, and imbalanced mobility and persistent marginality contributed to the construction of multiple identities. Already our society is fragmented in terms of being part agricultural, part industrial, part knowledge-based. There has been a process of multiple marginality in the society. So that has contributed to the whole process of construction of multiple identities in the society. And how these multiple identities are getting contextualizing and decontextualizing. Now, what we find is there has been enormous element of fluidity in Indian society. How those fluidities are identified in terms of construction of identities, because it is not in terms of the defined occupational categorization, not defining in terms of what we call class character or secular identities in the society. We find a new kind of identities are taking place across the space because workers are becoming part of the half pro and half day, huge kind of decontextualization in terms of migration from the rural to the urban space, urban to the metropolis, from metropolis to the global metropolis. So what we find a huge kind of decontextualization in terms of cultural location of Rwanda. Secondly, decontextualization in terms of generational divide, in terms of parental background and also workers' background. So we find a different kind of decontextualization is going place in the society. So nobody is located in particular place and space, rather it is getting widely diffused across the space. Simultaneously, we find an increasing quantum of consumerism and construction of the false need. We find it is not divided in terms of what is the basic minimum need of human society, rather the need which is created out of the advertisement, out of the competitive consumerism, culture of more competitive consumerism, and also a culture of to be up against the other. So what we find, there is a construction of a false need in the society. What is that false need? You don't need a vehicle only for your movement from one place to another. You need a vehicle so that it attracts a huge amount of prestige and status in the society. So this is the kind of a competitive consumerism and that is shaping the society. So here is the penetration of what we call neoliberal economic globalization. Then we find a kind of increasing insecurity and increasing fluidity, as I talked about. Then we find within the whole process a kind of a sense of instant gratification of the social need that is everywhere. That is how those needs are to be satisfied. Those are to be satisfied in terms of instant supply, instant gratification, maybe the food items, maybe the consumer items, maybe the accessorizing of one's the body and also mind. So what we find, old cultural identities, old collective identities, those who are defined in terms of village, in terms of nativity, in terms of professional categorization, are becoming questionable proposition. When it is becoming questionable proposition, we find it is getting a kind of a fluid character in the society. When it's getting fluid character, there has also been arrival simultaneously a kind of a cultural idiom to integrate the people, keep the people rooted in the society. So how they will keep rooted in the society? They will be remaining rooted in the society through certain cultural idioms, those rituals, those cultural practices, and those are not independent of the political practices, as we see. So there has been resurgence of the cultural practice, resurgence of the cultural idioms, cultural politics, caste politics, and the native politics, the religious politics, which you find across the space. The thing which has started from the early 1990s in terms of resurgence of the caste-based politics, now the resurgence of the religious politics, resurgence of the cultural politics, that is trying to locate the people, people in one place. So what is important is that we find a process of formulation of an identity that is creating a sense of fluidity on the one hand, fluidity in terms of economic globalization, fluidity in terms of hypermodernity, fluidity in terms of postmodernity, that is also getting consolidated on the other hand in the form of cultural politics, and populism, and also resurgence of nativity on the other. Now, what has happened in that way? Within the whole process, what you find, there has been a process of questioning. There has been a process of questioning everything, questioning of nativity also simultaneously, questioning of singularity also on the other, questioning the whole process of domination which is taking place. So what Prof talks about, I'll end there. Prof talks about knowledge society has unlatched the whole process of constant command. So what it talked about, it is rapid commanding through the consent. A society has emerged in the process of emerging that is questioning the whole process of unquestionable, so that they can be the part of the whole process of developmental journey of the society on the one hand, and assertion of their own identity in various terms, maybe in cultural terms, in native terms, in religious terms, obviously through the political terms. So I'll end at this stage, and should you have any question, so I'll be happy to answer it.
It's a participant. If the participants have any questions, you can please go ahead. हाँ नगमा.
I'm living.
Oh yes, yes.
Nagma, Promita, where are you all? Neha?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Professor Roy, extremely sorry, as there is a torrential rainfall here, so there might be certain network connectivity issues.
Any of you have any
Nagma,
questions?
go ahead.
Yes, we have
I have a
the
question.
Neha, you put your hand up on.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. I'm Neha Rajgupta. Thank you so much for such an informative and insightful lecture. And my question was basically regarding the knowledge workers. And sir, as you mentioned, we have knowledge producers, those who disseminate knowledge, those who transport, and those who exploit knowledge. And sir, just to clarify, do these groups have a large degree of overlap amongst themselves? And sir, the second part of my question is, if the fourth group, that is people who exploit knowledge, sir, does this group have a negative connotation such as related to plagiarism, etc.? Sorry, you're muted.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Neha, for asking these questions. See, these categories are not the watertight compartments. These categories are the reflection of a particular point of time. As I told, knowledge society provides the space of quantum social mobility in the society. That mobility is dependent on one's capacity to exploit one, what you call the one mind resource, the resource which is available in the mind, what you call which is available in one's brain. Okay. So initially, there is a possibility that a person may be joining as a transporter of this knowledge. That is, what is there in particular data somebody has given, somebody assembling this data and transferring in another place. So there is a possibility of transporting those information from one segment to another. But the same person will be motivated, simultaneously acquiring required skill and education to be part of the production of the knowledge. So there is a possibility of getting mobility from becoming a transporter to that of a producer of the knowledge. Okay. Now, he or she may be the disseminator. When somebody is disseminating, there is every possibility that dissemination may not be in the same language, in the same form. There is a possibility of so many innovation getting integrated with the whole process, and ultimately those who are disseminating. Now, the exploitation is that part already remained. Those who are exploiting that knowledge. Exploitation already we are having a negative connotation when we talk about. But in knowledge society, we talk about exploitation in terms of the full usage in terms of one's capacity. Okay. But what you talked about is there is a possibility also in terms of patent is one of the important components. People may not acknowledge that one. That is the possibility of giving a different kind of a shape. And involving into cyber crime is another. They are also the knowledge worker. But they are using their knowledge in negative connotation. That is one of the dark side of the knowledge society. And when the difference between the knowledge worker and the non-knowledge worker is so huge in our country, only 31% of our population is the knowledge worker. There is service sector. Okay. Knowledge worker will be within that roughly around 50 to 20% knowledge worker. Now keep in mind, when only 20% people are in the knowledge sector, others are the non-knowledge sector, because of not getting access to education and the skill, there is a possibility they will be exploited by the people, those who are having access about the knowledge. Number one. Number two, there is also cultural barrier. Many of the people, because of the lethargy and cultural barrier, they don't want to get integrated with the knowledge society, even don't want to learn. Say, elderly generation, they are not that fast, they are lag behind in comparison to that of a young generation. Give a mobile to a new generation, within 36 hours, he or she will be tell you what are the things there in the whole mobile phone. But for elderly people, it goes months, years and decades, they don't open their mind to learn. So ultimately, they lag behind, they remain vulnerable to be exploited by those exploiters of the knowledge society. So that knowledge gap is one of the important factors that is hindering the whole process of functioning of the knowledge society in Indian society. But knowledge society is a reality. That reality is not, it can't be explained only in terms of the theory of the middle class, so which we read sometime in the 80s or 90s. The theory of the middle class will not be able to give it, because that middle class emerged out of industrial revolution, but this knowledge worker has emerged out of knowledge revolution in the society. So we need a different kind of a perspective, different kind of literature to come in and to explore it. That's why I find that many of my students, those who have worked on the knowledge society, examiners were unable to understand what they have written. Because the conventional teacher, it will be quite difficult for them to understand what way knowledge society is progressing, what kind of mobility is taking place, what are the vocabularies, the theories of this society, concept of this societies. It needs enormous elaboration. In that way, I am thankful to Sudeshna for inviting me, to giving me an opportunity to talk to the young students. Yeah, thank you. Any further question, Neha?
No, sir. Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Thank you, sir.
Anyone else? Promita, Nagma, are you there? Have questions?
Yeah. Sir, good afternoon. My name is SinghaRoy. I'm a research scholar at the University of Calcutta. Sir, thank you for such an enlightening lecture. It was extremely helpful and extremely informative. Sir, my question to you is that, so you mentioned that, there's a need for insanity and there is for instant gratification and instant satisfaction in today's world. Now, sir, my question to you is that when we are pursuing our PhD or any kind of research or research project for that matter, there is a need to go in depth. There is a need to study in depth. There is no chance for instantly for that matter. But sir, today's world, because everything is so instant and everything is, all the time to do it instantly. So how to strike the balance? How even because that also comes in our way, right? When we are pursuing our PhD, that also comes in our way of doing things instantly because we are conditioned in that way. We are getting conditioned in that way. So sir, how to strike a balance in this? Thank you, sir. Sorry for your music.
Thank you. Your question is both having a social dimension, another is in the social dimension, we can understand that is everything. I mean, everything is becoming a kind of instant need. A kind of a huge kind of decontextualization and the recontextualization of a particular phenomenon. So one kind of construction is getting deconstructed in another moment. Take into consideration one image, it has come to the Facebook, it is going to be deconstructed by another few minutes. And every information, what we call, is having a dustbin value within few minutes. So everything getting reconstructed. So that is a social reality. We can't ignore it. Once you are accepting that's to be a social reality, what is warranted is that a research scholar is to be very vigilant about each and every moment. Because earlier we had 2-3 important research tools going to the field, collect the data, what we call in the rapport building. Then we were doing the cross-checking at the end, maintaining the diary. But what we find that is true and false, public eyes and private eyes, and what do we stand, we do not know ultimately. So what is important for a student to remain vigilant each and every moment. And you have to question every unquestionable proposition. Because until unless that questioning and critiquing remain, unless that questioning and critiquing remain, we will not be able to understand that. So the way take into consideration Althusser was widely talking about, and also we know it is talking about in terms of postmodernist focus formulation. We are controlled in each and every second of our life by several factors. We are controlled by culture. We are controlled by the major discourse, the social structure. We are controlled by the space. There is very little space for individuals to express themselves their own liberty, except perhaps the private rooms and one corner of the private room. Because that space of liberty is conspicuously missing. So whatsoever the defined in terms of liberty, equality and fraternity in terms of political discourse coming from the state and propagated among the mass, but in terms of practice, there is a little space for individual liberty. If we accept that, then we have to find out what way those institutions, those rituals, those discourse, those kind of a discussion controlling human body, mind and interaction. And in what way human being are developing their every kind of strategy to withstand those kind of a control. I'll give you only one example from the Badiko Dekhi Chotovalai. Even nagging mother-in-law, always nagging for a tea from his daughter-in-law. I need a cup of tea. Daughter-in-law will give it forcefully, but at times she will express her discontent. She is not getting any space to express her discontent. At least she will give the cup of the tea with a little bit of sound. What does it mean? That means there is every people having the capacity and desire to express the discontent. So as a social scientist, we have to find out what are the spaces, what are the idioms through which we are controlled, and what are the places people are using, idioms people are using to express their discontent, articulating their protest against those kind of things. So balancing is not possible, but what is possible to identify the areas of control, idioms of control, and to locate the simultaneous processes through which people are withstanding those kind of problems. Both in terms of information sharing, in terms of speed, in terms of cultural accumulation, everything. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nagma, you have your hand raised.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for such enlightening lecture and for the plethora of knowledge that you have shared with us. It is going to help us in our future studies. And sir, my question here is about identity. As you mentioned that we actually in social science, we try to use identity as a cover term, right? And then you were actually saying about these manual puzzle theory where you say that we actually assign status and role to attach meaning to the identity, and we have the legitimacy to derive meaning from this identity, right? And its nature is flexible, and its essential component it goes under construction, rigorous construction, and then we have cultural specification. At the same time, we have it is linked to this power relation, right? So here, when we talk about this differentiating individual self from collective self, do you think that it is feasible in today's time to actually differentiate between the two? Because sometimes it is very difficult when we try to build an individual self, because of the influence of this collective self, it's very difficult, right, in society in today's time. So my question is is it feasible to differentiate between two? Thank you, sir.
It is quite important because our collective self, difference between the individual self and collective self is not watertight. It's not possible to totally compartmentalize like this. But that difference remains. That difference remains even though it is not watertight. That collective self, as I told you, it is a product of varieties of the forces interacting in the society. As I told, in today's world, it is collective self is in terms of your neoliberal economic forces that has made you a consumer. That has made you a consumer, a dependent consumer who is victim of varieties of publicity and advertisement in the society. And unless somebody is equal consumer in equal terms, in terms of visibility of those consumer items, perhaps one's identity is reflected. So that is in terms of one's what we call product of economic development. Simultaneously, we find you are a product of hyper-modernity. That is, you need something localized as a part of post-modernity, but you want to have an instant gratification of those satisfied, because your colleague or your friend or your peer group or your some relative has got those items you need it. You want to express yourself. So that is one. Third is that another contradiction is that your choices are not necessarily in terms of your own aspiration. Your choices may be politically driven. What kind of vocabularies you will be using? What kind of idioms you will be using? It is a kind of a political choice that is made part of your habit through a process of what we call habitat that is widely tested. So we live in a world that is always, human being has always lived in a world of repression on the one hand and desire to come out of the repression on the other. It has always been. It has always been. But finest part of the human being is that they try to come out of that whole, whole repression and develop their everyday strategy to break those kind of repression. Here the contradiction is that false need and the genuine need. My false need may be your genuine need, your genuine need may be my false need. That is widely subjective. And that genuineness at one point of time, many a time, we try to be false to ourselves to reveal to be true in the eyes of others. In many ways, like this, there's a good example that is a skin-tight jean may not be very comfortable for a boy, for a young boy, but he will love to use it because he wants to project himself as a modern man, postmodern man in the eyes of others. So false to oneself, that is a kind of a discomfort for oneself, but revealing oneself as a macho man in front of others, that's the individual reflexivity. But in terms of collective reflexivity, you will find that people will try to develop a kind of space for themselves by creating varieties of the idioms. They may deviate themselves. That's why there is a possibility of deviating from one's own standard. Deviating from one standard in terms of will be association with literature, association with poetry, will be philosophical in life, and okay, I'm not part of this, I'm something else. So people try to have a conflicting situation always in terms of personal desire, personal reflexivity, and societal need. That thing is there, and that has always been part of human existence. But it is also part of human existence how to articulate that kind of a strategy to develop its own kind of space for expression. But the danger is that if severely becomes a nasty habit, if slavery becomes a nasty habit and you internalize it, it becomes quite difficult to break the barriers of slavery because you eulogize it as a kind of your own politics. So how the society looks your slavery, how you look your subordination or insubordination, that is an individual choice.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? We do have some more PhD scholars on board. Namrata, Ochinto, do you have questions? Okay. A big thank you from my side, Devoda.
Oh, thank you.
I'm leaving the platform. It's over to my HOD to continue.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So nice to be in the company of your student. Yes, I really enjoyed my interaction with them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor SinghaRoy, for such a wonderful lecture, and thank you, participants, for your questions as well. I would now like to request Dr. Sushmita Bhattacharya to kindly give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor SinghaRoy, for the enriching lecture considering the contemporary context of Indian society. On behalf of Department of Sociology, Calcutta University, we are really grateful to you for giving us your precious time. Through your lovely presentation, we become aware of issues of developmental discourse, knowledge production with respect to different societies, identity and knowledge connection, decontextualization of Indian society. Thank you all the participants for joining us, and thank you again, Professor SinghaRoy.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to be among you. Yeah, thank you. Should there be any question, you can email me. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.